with the feasibility study for year-round schools. We will bring back next month more definitive data. Our parent survey and staff survey is still open. We're going to have one more call out to be able to get as much information back as we can. The overall purpose of the study, if we move to the next slide, was really just to educate staff, families, and students about this option of year-round schools, to share research and information and access support from families and also the community. We also wanted to look at a feasibility plan if this was something that we wanted to do to move forward. The big thing on this slide to keep in mind is that this was something that we were studying, so no decisions have been made at this time, and it's not to go into place next year. If we determine at the end of this study it's something we're interested in, we would have an entire year to plan, and it would be something we would consider for 24-25. We did utilize an outside provider. If you'll go to the next slide. We contracted with independent consultants RTI. The great thing about using the outside providers is they're non-biased, but they're also experts in a variety of different things. So the consultants we were partnered with had been superintendents, principals, and teachers in year-round schools. And so they had expertise that many of us in district leadership really did not have. The types of things they helped us do, they helped design the study so that we could have a comprehensive process. They helped develop materials, the presentations, videos. They also helped us with the analytics and looking at the survey data as well. We'll go to the next slide. This just shows that we've had a variety of partners throughout this process. Everybody has a different role. So families are really receiving the information, giving feedback, and telling us what they need if we were to move forward with this process. Our role as a district is to share the information, to listen, and then we're kind of a neutral party. We just are taking in the information. RTI is helping partner with us to give us support through this process, and then I want to give a big shout out to our district partners. You can see kind of the logos there of the different partners that we've worked with. They have been so helpful in meeting with families. They came to all of the presentations we did with families. Many of them held additional family sessions after the ones we provided as a district, and they even met with some families to do some of the surveys on paper and to answer questions for our families. So we could not have done this process without them. The feeder pattern we were looking at, if you'll keep clicking, I think it takes a couple of clicks, is the Siler City feeder pattern, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about why that feeder pattern was selected. Really, we're looking at 3 schools: Siler City Elementary, Virginia Cross, and Chatham Middle. Jordan Matthews is listed there, obviously, because it's a part of the feeder pattern, but we were really unsuccessful in finding many 9-12 public high schools that do year-round, mostly because of athletics. We did find a few charters and also a couple of private schools that have year-round at high schools. Silk Hope is also listed here because that is a school that we could potentially use if we moved in this direction as an opt-out location. But depending upon if we were to move forward, it could be we only do one elementary school, and it could be the other elementary is the opt-out. So we did not meet with any of the Silk Hope community as far as this process other than sharing the things on the website. Because no decisions have been made. If there was a decision to move forward, we would make sure that we also would meet with folks in that community as well. The history of this project, just thinking a little bit about what we know about that feeder pattern, this really came from our staff, community, and our school leaders in this feeder pattern. So we heard a lot about year-round schools prior to COVID. It came up in our last strategic planning process and was actually an area that was in that strategic plan. But COVID kind of derailed this process. Our principals from this community asked if we would look into this as a model, and then of course with COVID we had to halt that. So we're kind of picking back up that request from those folks. We know that the schools in this community are Title I, and they've also traditionally had lower performance grades, and they are restart schools. So the middle school and the 2 elementaries are restart schools. This gives them calendar flexibility already, so we would not have to go to the state board to be able to get that. And that's unique, so we couldn't do that same thing in other parts of our community because those schools are not restart schools. So that really is kind of why Siler City community was selected for this study. If you'll keep going. These are just a couple of things to consider as we think about the post-COVID landscape. Our families are operating differently. We have people working from home, we have people that are doing a lot of traveling, helping support family members, and so many districts really are looking at different types of calendar flexibilities. And so that's just some of the information that our RTI consultants gathered for us related to thinking about how Our lives are just different after COVID. This just shows you a little bit of the design that we used and how we utilized RTI. So we've tried to look at staff support, family support, how much capacity our community partners have to support this if we were to move forward, and then also what is our internal operational capacity, because it would require changes in transportation. It would change how we pay our staff if we had to move to year-round. So there are lots of moving parts. So those are kind of the 4 buckets that we looked at. And thinking about as we move forward and we bring you more information next month, the types of things that we'll be bringing you would be, what level of staff support do we have? What percentage of our staff were in support of this? What support do we have from families? What support would we have as far as research for how this would support student learning? And then the last consideration would also be, what would this do for our internal workings? What types of things would we have to change internally if we wanted to make this work? Okay. So as far as community engagement, we have a variety of ways that we've done that. So we hosted meetings with school and district leaders. That started actually last summer in our Summer Leadership Institute. We worked with them on kind of what would this plan look like, what would the study entail. We also worked to identify community partners. We had in-person information sessions, and we've also done surveys. This next slide just shows you kind of the timeline of how all of that kind of played out. It's really the same information, but just kind of on a timeline. And the next slide shows you exactly kind of how many meetings we've held. It's been quite a bit of work. So when we think about that first bucket with how many in-district planning sessions we've held, we've had about 25 meetings total. 4 of those were with school staff, 5 were district planning team sessions, and we've had about 16 meetings where RTI has kind of worked with us in planning or developing the study. The second bucket there was identification of community partners. We really met regularly with about 7 partners. We held 5 different meetings and had over 35 people that we worked with. And you saw some of those community partners listed earlier, but we also had some churches that were also interested in providing childcare and that kind of thing. The next bucket is looking at in-person information sessions or sessions that we did specifically for schools. So we did 3 district in-person sessions, so 1 at each of the schools that were impacted, so Virginia Cross, Siler City, and Chatham Middle. We had 1 virtual session, and we had 2 recorded sessions. So if families missed it, or if it was too much to take in that night and they wanted to hear it all again, we had the entire presentation recorded in both English and Spanish. We also had 3 of our schools that provided additional sessions. Not 3 of our schools, it was 2 of our schools who had 3 different parent sessions that they led on their own. So after we held an event, they then followed up with a parent night to help families understand the information and do the survey if they would like. We had overall so far about 1,000 participants, about half of which were done on paper. So we've had a little bit of time to try to enter those survey feedback that were turned in on paper. The questionnaires, we had 1 staff survey and 1 parent and community survey. So far, we've had over 800 responses, but again, the paper ones are still coming in, and we're doing 1 last phone call tomorrow to be able to get that last push out.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
I'm sorry. What kind of questions are you asking in the survey, and what kind of information are you putting out there for parents and staff?
Sure. So the survey itself asks a couple, I don't have it in front of me, I'll try to remember. It asks where you have a child, what levels, what school represented, if this is something that you think would be beneficial for the school. The next question asks, if this were something that your school were to do, what would your intention be? Would you want to remain at this school, or would you want your child to attend in another location? We also asked families if this was something that we move forward with, what type of support would they need? So one question, one of the selections is they would need childcare for the intersessions. Another question asked if families would be interested in remedial tutorials during those intersessions. And then there's an open-ended section where they can also give just any type of things they want us to consider in this process. So that's one of the things that our RTI consultants are helping with right now, is taking all of that narrative information and kind of boiling it down to themes that we're hearing from the community, from parents, and from staff.
And that's ongoing still, or is that recent? The questionnaires have gone out recently?
It's been almost a month now that the surveys have been in place. So our schools have sent, I think, a total, most of them have sent at least 10 either reminders or phone calls. We had, of course, the sessions that we did in person as well, and then all of the materials are located on the district website in English and Spanish, both the slides, the videos, all of the questionnaires, and frequently asked questions. So as families sent in questions, RTI answered those questions for us so that we could kind of answer questions in real time. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay. The next piece you've seen before, so I'm going to kind of slide right by this, but this is just the actual legislation related to year-round schools, and there are very specific guidelines of what schools and districts can and can't do related to year-round schools. The thing here I just want to mention is we were looking at a multi-track program. So some districts use what is called a multi-track. We are looking at a single track. I think I just said that backwards, y'all.
I was just gonna say.
Let me go back, hang on. So we are looking at a single track option. You often will hear in other larger districts like Wake County, they use that multi-track model, which is where you might have double the amount of students in a school. One group of kids is in school, one group is out, and they constantly rotate. That is not the model that we would be looking at. We would be looking at a single model where students are in the school in one track, and they have 9 weeks of instruction and then a 2 to 3 week break. And you'll see that here in just a moment. I'll show you what that looks like. So if you'll keep going, there's a, you have to click a few times, sorry. There's a slide that shows what the calendar looks like side by side, and this is the one I think families, kind of really shows you what the difference is. So on this side over here, you'll see it's on my left. That's what our current calendar looks like. So you see we're in school until roughly December before we have really any long break at all. In the year-round calendar, you see we start a little bit earlier, and then we have a break in September, October for about 2 to 3 weeks. So you see those are kind of evenly distributed 9-week blocks with smaller breaks built throughout the year. So that's kind of how they look side by side. If we were to try to move forward with an option like this, we would want to make sure that we tried to line it up as much as we could with our spring break and our holiday break, things like that. You'll keep going. You'll go a couple of slides forward where it says benefits to students. One more past this one. So some of the benefits that we really wanted to hone in on were related to how does this benefit student learning? And one of the things that research has told us is that year-round schooling options can be a model to reduce summer learning loss. Now, I will say that the research that RTI pulled together for us, it is a little bit dated. Most of it was from the late 90s and early 2000s. That's really when the rise of kind of year-round schooling happened, and so you see a lot of research from that time period. Some of the research that has been cited kind of against year-round is typically, if you look at it more closely, it's on that multi-track model. And so most of the research, or really all of the research that we pulled, focused in on that single-track model. And so as we had people who shared with us some of that research that they found that was a little more negative-like, as we dug further and RTI looked into it, it typically was that multi-track. So that we just wanted to make sure we pointed that piece out. In addition, you also, research will tell us that you can also see improved teacher satisfaction, so less teacher burnout, teacher attendance improving, as well as student behavioral increases as well. And those are just a few. So that's kind of where we are. I'm happy to answer questions about kind of what we've been up to with this. If you have specific questions, next month we plan to bring all of the data to you. So the analytics from each of our schools broken down by school, as well as the parent surveys broken down by school, and then any kind of next steps as far as the feasibility study.
Summer slide versus 3 weeks, right? I've read that it can be pretty much the same, so I know that's an unknown. And you mentioned 2 to 3 weeks, so what tutorial, intervention during that 1 week, is that what you're looking at?
So one of the things that we did find in the research is that just changing the calendar in and of itself is really not the magic bullet, right? If it were, I think lots of districts would do it. What really couples with that is having a strong tutorial and intervention program during those intercession periods. So one of the questions on the staff survey was asking if they wanted to have additional employment during those intercessions. Teachers are not required to do that, but just like teachers work during the summer, and they have additional pay for that, we would offer some of our staff to have that time to do additional employment with us to be able to serve our students. So again, it's kind of not just changing the calendar, it's also putting an intervention program in place so that you would be catching the kids in real time versus waiting till the end of the year and trying to catch them up over the summer.
Cost-wise, are there differences?
There are some differences, so as a part of our next month presentation, we'll have a little bit more information about some of the costs that you could look at. In many cases, some of the costs could be neutral. Many districts that have incurred cost, it usually is because they offer intercession childcare for families, and that's a cost that the district will bear. As far as other pieces, there can be some cost savings as well. So it's really in just how you design your program. So we'll have some of those kind of fiscal considerations in the presentation for you next month so that you can kind of see where are places we could save money and where are some ways that we would possibly incur additional expenses.
I guess another question I have I know staff for the last several years have done a 4-day work week during the summer. And so that's another consideration, I guess, and that would probably have to change with year-round school in session, I guess. I just thought about that.
Yeah, it depends on how you build your calendar, because if you have overlap during that same time for intercession, you really can build your calendar. It's the 45 days of instruction, and then you have flexibility on those 15 days, how you build those out, what expectations you put in place for those staff. But they will have a different calendar. There will be some time that will overlap with the traditional calendar. If you look at that model sheetlet, for example, some of the longer breaks, there's some overlapping time with it. But it's how you build your calendar, and you've got lots of flexibility there. Not much. Now, the big difference that I want to say is that you're really not going to school any more days or any less days. It's the same number of instructional days. The teachers will have the same number of calendar days. They're just distributed differently. That's the only benefit of the calendar, you're doing it in a different, you're just redistributing the days differently, as opposed to going to school for that long stretch, short break, long stretch, short break.
Similarly, one of the staff questions that we were asked the most often, and similar to what Dr. Jackson just shared, is how would we find the funds to be able to do the tutorials? And so one of the things that you have to think about is we do tutorials for all of those schools already in the summer, and we typically do that over a 4 to 5 week period. So instead of doing it kind of in one big chunk, you would be taking those same summer school funds that we have and just redistributing them throughout the school year. So it's really all about kind of how you're using your time. But the actual license, the number of days for teachers, all of that remains the same. We're just paying them on a different cycle.
And another key component compared to decades ago when I looked into this is that at the time then versus now, we now have the child care component in all the communities and throughout the whole county. So back then it didn't exist, and so that is a major step forward because what does mom and dad do for the 3 weeks, in October? So that's going to be that's a big hurdle that's taken care of.
Well,
And
go ahead. I'll come back.
Dr. Moran, question I want to ask. I'm surprised that the guys haven't already asked this, but I know it's burning on their minds, so I'm gonna give them a break. What will happen since our timeline wouldn't align with any of the schools around us? What would happen to the athletic programs?
So the good thing, and Mr. Blythe can correct me if I say this wrong, but the good thing about our middle school program is that we would be competing against our own district. And because we would just be looking at elementary and middle, we would not have to think about the high school athletic piece at this point in time. So we're really just looking at the elementary and middle. Mr. Blythe, did I say that correctly?
But middle also does athletics, so if they're out, they're being transportation provided by the parents to get them to practices and games.
We would have to figure all that out when we make our schedule. You're familiar.
And I think it's important to, that's why we're studying, that is one of the cons. The other, I mean, that's really why high school programs are not made. I think it's the athletic piece. Middle school probably would be a challenge. I mean, you'd have to do some things differently. And plan your schedules around you would have one more, I think, hurdle that you'd have to include as you build out an athletic schedule. It's not, particularly if it's just one, it'll be tough.
Well, the one there at high school, and I know, and not all the high school students are driving, so you can't say that's the answer, but, football starts way before school starts.
3 weeks,
Yeah.
3 to 4, somewhere in that mark.
I mean, August 1st, so, the athlete, it's a hurdle.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I can say, it's a hurdle that can be jumped over.
It would just be hard.
And work out.
Socioeconomic,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
some
it's a
issues
challenge.
there.
There will be some challenges.
I had a question I'm confused on the daycare.
The YMCA, before there was not a YMCA, and then,
Do we have that throughout our schools? It is in,
In the impacted areas, in the areas that we're looking at right now, we have those partners that should.
there's a South Street District, yeah, with Boys and Girls Club, but not throughout the county.
No.
Correct.
They're not in every school.
oh, no.
Okay, that's what I was confused, I was thinking.
We have met with those partners to see kind of what their capacity would
Okay,
be if
okay.
this were something that we were interested. They're very interested in partnering. I think their biggest concern, and that'll be something we'll share with you next time, some of the implications would be being able to adequately staff programs at each of the schools. So some of the things that we'll bring back to you next month would be the pros and cons as identified by the survey from both families and staff. We'll bring back all of that data and analytics for you, some of the financial impacts that we could potentially see, other impacts to the districts or hurdles, if you will, and then some of the potential solutions for some of those hurdles. And then ultimately, we'll have some recommendations for next step in the study.
And again, just to reiterate, you mentioned at the beginning, this is not for next year, it is for
No.
24, 25. Just want to make sure.
That is correct.
One of your slides said something about there was a statistical difference. Are you going to bring more next month about, how much the data supports that there's a difference, how much of a difference it makes, where that data comes from?
So most of the research that we have from RTI were meta-analysis, so they pulled together some of the larger studies, and we'll have all of the white papers listed in the references for the presentation so we can see that. As far as the actual statistical impact, a lot of the meta-analysis looks at it a little more holistically. I'd be happy to share some of the white papers though if you wanted to get into some of that. We tried to look at things that were taking larger numbers, because a lot of the studies are just looking at Wake County or just looking at Orange County. And so we tried to pull research that was kind of globally from across the country and much larger sample sizes. But I'll see if we have anything specific to that with our partners.
And I think the nice thing about this is that, like you said, the early 90s, so we're about 30 years, we're not having to invent the wheel. And there's been a lot of people to go through the athletics question, to go through childcare, it's out there, and RTI has collected that, and so it's, a lot of the hard work has already been done by other school systems, and we can learn from that. So.
But South City is different than possibly somewhere in Wake County. So there are some things we need to, we can't just take the research without looking at individually. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.